going to have a session on women who stand for peace, inspiring testimonies from leaders and activists. And this session is going to be moderated by Francesca, Executive Director of Quartz, who is going to join us with her different guests. Thank you for being with us, Francesca. Francesca is almost there. We are going to have this session, and after that, youth voices. We have all these youth voices who have participated yesterday to an event. Francesca, you're here. We're going to hear you after that. Thank you very much.
I'm looking for a very special guest who's going to be here in a moment. So welcome to our panel entitled Women Stand for Peace. Last night when I was sitting in my hotel room around 1 or 2 a.m., unable to sleep and frantically writing these questions, I was looking at the name of the panel and feeling rather frustrated because there's something about peace that sounds awfully meek and quiet and mild and peaceful, and none of these women who you're about to meet are meek or mild. They are peaceful, but in a different kind of sense. And so I decided, I don't think that organizers know this, but I decided that I was going to rename the panel. So you are no longer at the Women Stand for Peace panel. You are actually at the Power Women panel. Welcome. This is a panel about women making waves, women standing up, women saying no, and women saying now. In this panel, we're going to hear stories about women who've been pushed down due to inequity, conflict, climate, violence, greed, and we're going to take a look at what happens when we stop and say, yes, we see you. Yes, come to the table. Yes, make a difference. Yes, yes, yes. I have 4 extraordinary panelists who I'll introduce in a moment. But before I begin, I'd like to give the stage to a Russian journalist. Her name is Marina Ovsenikova, and she has her own story to share. So please put your hands together for Marina. She's going to come out here and say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. It's truly incredible for me to be here on the Women's Forum. The war in Ukraine became at a point of no return for me. At the moment, everyone in Russia had to decide whom are you with, on the side of good or on the side of evil. Russia has become an aggressor country that suddenly attacked another independent country at night. At such moment, one falls in the stupor. Some are trying to run, hide, protect themselves and their families. But I decided that I would not be silent. I will act. At first, I had a desire to run to the center of Moscow to protest, but I saw that was useless. All the protesters were arrested by police and taken to prison. Before my protest on the HÁWAR broadcast, I called my friend. He resigned from TV on the first day of the war. I jokingly told him about my plans. He was horrified. He said, "Don't do it. You are a weak woman. Wait another week and we men will decide everything. We will stop this war. You don't have to take risk. It's huge risk. You are alone. You have children." After my protest, this man was so scared that he even stopped answering my calls. But I wasn't afraid. After my protest, I have been interrogated for 3 hours at the TV center. Then there was 14 hours interrogation without lawyers at the police station. I had nothing to hide. I had to true on my side. The Russia, it's forbidden to call a war a war. but I don't want to be hypocritical. Every day people die in Ukraine. Millions of destinies are destroyed. I understand very well how Ukrainian women and children feel now. As a child, I experienced the same things. My family fled from Grozny when the first Chechen war started there. My house was destroyed and our things were burned. Then were many years for torments, suffering, and hopelessness. The first victims of this senseless war are Ukrainian women. They are raped. Russia kidnapped their children. 1 month ago, when I worked as a journalist in Moldova, I talked to women and children from Mariupol. They told how they sat in the basement, they ate cats and buried their husband in flower beds. For me, it was a real shock. Hundreds of women and children now live in the huge exhibition center of Chisinau. They live in the terrible condition. They don't want to go to European Union because they hope this war will end soon. 2 weeks ago, as a journalist, I went to Ukraine. This is my native country. I was born in Odessa, but I have lived in Russia almost all my life. My father is Ukrainian, my mother is Russian. I wanted to crush the Kremlin propaganda. I wanted to tell the Russians about the war crimes in Bucha, in Mariupol. I really want to help. But I was not allowed to work in Ukraine. I was forced to flee from Kiev, hiding in the back seat of the car. The Ukrainians accused me to be Russian and allegedly a former propagandist, which absolutely not true, and therefore I have no rights to come to Ukraine. Its situation is absurd now. The Russian authorities want to deprive me of citizenship and put me in jail. The Ukrainian authorities want to ban me from entering the country and put me in jail too. This is information war and no one trusts anyone, and I happened to be in the epicenter of this confrontation. I was allowed to leave Russia because my children stayed there. My ex-husband, who works for another Kremlin propaganda TV channel, doesn't allow them to leave Russia. He filed charges against me in court. He's trying to take my children away from me because I am traitor. That's where I am as a result of my fighting against this senseless war. But I don't regret anything. Good will still triumph over evil, and I will continue to fight for it. And thank you so much for inviting me to the Women Forum. You raised women's voice and change the world to better.
Marina, I know you're backstage. I wish you could have seen everyone standing up for you. Thank you for sharing your story. So I'm back to the Power Women panel, and I'd like to introduce 4 amazing power women. I've had the chance to speak to them all, and I'm so excited to have them up here on the stage to share their thoughts, their views, their stories. They each have a bio that could fill a book, so I'm going to keep it very short. Right. Let's start at this end. In the blue jacket, we have Düzen Tekkal, and she is the founder of HÁWAR, which is a human rights organization, and she also started Back to Life, which she will talk about. Next, we have Grace Forrest. She is the co-founder of Walk Free, an organization dedicated to eliminating modern slavery. Here in the middle, we have Selene Biffi. We were trying to make an estimate here and having a good laugh about it. We think that she's probably built about 8 different social ventures over 15 years, but we're not really sure. But one of her latest projects, which she'll talk about today, is called She Works for Peace. And then next to me, I have Fatimah Hossaini, who is the founder of the Mastoorat organization, and she's also an artist and a photographer in her own right. And if you haven't seen her pictures, you need to go see them. They're in the hallway upstairs. They are hers. So it's very exciting to have an artist among us. So I'm going to get started with you, Grace. Your organization, which you co-founded with your father, it's called Walk Free. It's committed to eradicating slavery. And I wonder if I might ask you what you saw that made you get this organization off the ground. What made you say enough is enough? And also you were quite young when it got off the ground, I think.
I was very young, and I'm going to give a one-liner answer to this because I think, we don't need white people's view on why things are bad because they're bad. So I would say I was 14 years old and I saw the commodification of human beings in the 21st century, of children as young as 3 years old being sold for sex. And this was a transnational supply chain, which I learnt the hard way years later. Actually, the very orphanage I'd worked in had re-trafficked all the children again. Modern slavery is the most profitable organised crime in the world. It affects over 40 million people globally. And like many of the world's major challenges, from climate to COVID-19 to conflict, it is a highly gendered problem. So to put the numbers in perspective, it's 1 in every 130 women and girls on Earth living in modern slavery. This is a pre-COVID-19 estimate, so I can guarantee you it is conservative. And we're describing modern slavery as an umbrella term that describes a number of highly exploitative practices, from state-imposed forced labor in private supply chains, forced marriage, debt bondage. We're responsible for producing the world's leading data set on measuring and understanding modern slavery in partnership with the ILO and IOM. And I think, to wrap up on this relation to this subject, on war, on peace, on conflict, war and conflict is a driver of modern slavery, but it is equally a driver that puts people in vulnerability in our economy. As close as the shirt on your back, 1 in 5 cotton garments on Earth is coming out of Xinjiang right now. As close as the tin tuna you see in supermarkets, Rohingya refugees exploited on Thai fishing fleets, displaced from the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, or even the conflict palm oil in your toothpaste or beauty products, which actually I wanted to ask earlier about. This is as close as the things we consume every day, and it's something we need to act with more urgency around.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And I want to stay on you, even though you don't want it. You gave a few really excellent examples, but I wonder if you can talk quite specifically about what modern slavery looks like today. And I have had some ideas about how it can be happening under our noses when we're brushing our teeth with very products that are problematic. But if you can sort of speak in really concrete terms to help people understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. So I think in relation to a forced or a child marriage, we're looking at a girl child's complete inability to refuse the situation, married off around the age of 8 years old to a male suitor, often for a cost expended between a community. And COVID-19 greatly exacerbated this economic vulnerability, with Somalia, for example, looking at re-legalizing child marriage for children as young as 8 in 2020 because of the economic volatility that was felt. It looks like domestic migrant workers who travel in their hundreds of thousands into Gulf states, into Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, that underpin these countries' economies. They cannot function without these workforces. And yet, I have never interviewed a migrant worker who has not been deeply exploited or experienced modern slavery in one form or another. It looks like the Uyghur population in Xinjiang in China being detained and held and being forced to work against their will. It looks like a Rohingya refugee. Again, refugees in so many settings are disproportionately impacted by forced labor that pays for a job to work on a Thai fishing boat. But when they get there, they realize they actually have to work 3 months before that debt can be paid off. But then they're charged for every dirty glass of water they're given, they're charged for every meal. They start to be given salt water on the sea to drink, and if they question it, they're just thrown overboard. The differentiation between modern slavery and historical slavery is massive, but also the two are very, very connected. And what the two have in common is that it is the continued commodification of human beings in the 21st century, and it is not an accident that it is the same countries, empires, Western empires, that are continuing to exploit or benefit from the exploitation of countries across the global south.
Okay. Düzen, let's jump to you. Let's jump to you for a moment. You founded HÁWAR with your sisters after you made a visit to Iraq with your father, if I'm correct about that. And I wonder if you can tell me about that visit and what you saw and why this prompted you to start making change immediately.
The reason was a very sad reason. It was because of the genocide against my own people, about the genocide against Yazidis. So 2014, that was the time when ISIS invaded Iraq and Yazidi villages. And I became overnight a human rights activist and war reporter, and I went there as a journalist. But what I saw there with my own eyes was so awful that I immediately understood that to being a journalist is not enough. And I was born and raised in Germany, but I have Kurdish Yazidi roots. So the story which I ever wanted to tell the world, no one was interested, to be honest. And every week I went in the media house where I worked for one of the biggest broadcast TV stations. I went to my boss and I said, I would like to make something about the Yazidi people. And he was asking me, what? Who? And when ISIS went in our villages and made this genocide against our people, we became popular overnight in a very ugly way. But the story I always wanted to tell then was ready to tell. And that was the reason why I left my secure hometown in Germany and went to Iraq. And of course, that was my life-changing moment, because that was the first time in my life that I found something which was bigger than my fear. And the moment when I went to Iraq was one of the most dangerous areas at the time. It was 2 weeks after James Foley was beheaded. Mm-hmm. And of course, ISIS was in Mosul, for example, in Raqqa, in Syria. And I don't know why, but I had to make this journey. And from that beginning, it was like a new life, new birth. And I came back as another person. And I left everything behind me, which was not so important in my way, and said to my sisters, we have to found out an NGO out of the ashes of genocide. And they were shocked and was like, why? And then I showed them the pictures and my documentary, and then everything was clear. And 8 years after the genocide, the people are still in the IDP camps. I just came back from Iraq 1 week ago. And we opened our second Women Empowerment Center there. So this is the meaning of Back to Life, to bring life, not just survive, to the people there. And it's multi-ethnical and multi-religious, which is very important for our work. We also work in Afghanistan, Pakistan, because I think for reconciliation, it's very important to bring women together. And this is something which was very meaningful for me in the way how we made our human rights work. So no one was waiting for us, and we were not used to, or we didn't study how to create an NGO or things like that. So we became powerful because of the work at the front line and because of the experiences from the people there. And this is what we actually are doing right now.
Yeah. I want to get back to that, but there are a couple of things that you said that already offended me in a good way. One of them is how the world was not interested in these stories. That's one thing. And I want to connect it with something else that you said, which of course you made a documentary, and I've seen bits of it, and it's incredibly harrowing, unvarnished, and difficult to watch. And I wonder if you can sort of connect those two things together of how we make people pay attention. This is a problem for all of us on this stage, that people get bored of the story du jour and move on, and suddenly nobody's talking about whatever the crisis is. You know, people move on. And I think it was really upsetting to hear your story of being a journalist and say, we need to cover this. And everyone's like, oh, why? It's nothing to see here. So talk to me a little bit about how we make people interested and keep the attention on, keep the spotlight on it, and also, and how your documentary connects to that.
I think pain is a very powerful energy if you can use it in a good way. And the fact that no one was listening, no one was interested of the existence of my religious, of my identity, was one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the biggest aims which I ever had, to make clear that every human being is equal. But as we know, this is not the truth. So, of course, we see in Europe right now that there's a war happening, and we had the same situation in Afghanistan, we had it in Syria, we have it in Iraq. So what Putin have done, he had also done in Syria and Iraq, but no one in Europe was so interested like today, which is very normal in a way. So it doesn't mean that critical. But for me, it was like the half of me was German and European, but the other one was Yazidi and Kurdish. And therefore I had to go there. And I didn't went to Rwanda, and I didn't went to Yugoslavia. This is also the truth. But I think the fact that I knew that was my people was very important. But what I learned from that was that every human being or every war is important to tell. And of course, as a journalist, I know how powerful and important storytelling is. Mm-hmm. And we have to be storytellers for our stories, even when no one is interested in your story. You have the power to make the story to a story. Just one example, yesterday I was in a German parliament, and we were talking about the issue and the recognition of the genocide against the Yazidi people in Germany, which is huge, which is very huge, because, as I told you, no one was interested in our identity. That was because of the activists who made the story of these people who no one was interested in popular. And the most important one was the women who were in the hands of ISIS. Women like Nadia Murad, but we have more of them. We had yesterday one in the German parliament, Hakima Taha, which is a survivor of Kocho, a village which is no existed anymore because everyone was killed by ISIS. And she said, I'm not a victim anymore. I'm an agent of change. I'm a survivor. And I want to tell you my story to make clear that we are not ill. We want justice. We don't need medicine. We want justice and the recognition of the genocide. And to get in touch with so powerful women or people or human beings who have lost everything, and there's still a fire, and that the fact that fear is no option gives you a lot of energy. And therefore I have nothing to do, just to go there and to talk the camera on that, what is happening there, and to bring it back to Germany, to our good networks which we have, and to irritate and to confrontate the people here, and make clear there are so many wars happening which you are not interested in, but human rights are equal and every story have to be told. And when media is saying I'm not interested, you have to tell the story.
I totally agree. Thank you. Thank you for that.
There are 43 active conflicts in the world right now, and people could probably name 2.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that. That was really important. And I like stories as well. So I'm right there with you. And Fatimah, I'd actually like to turn it to you now. And we've had angry conversations about how Afghan women are consistently presented in the same light. But one thing that your work does is really cast Afghan women in an unexpected light, in a non-predictable light, quite different from what the media has taught us to expect. And I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about your work, but also why does it matter that we, or you, through your camera, have portrayed Afghan women in this light? Why does that matter?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Actually, the question that you asked about women of Afghanistan, I have to say that when you talk about Afghanistan and when you say Afghan women, everybody think about burqa, everybody think about the dark image that the world always recognized from women in my country, but never the beauty, never the colors, never the things that I discovered in Afghanistan. I mean, to be honest, I'm always tired of victimization because I was born in Tehran, Iran, and I grew up as a refugee, and in a time that I didn't migrate from any country to another, but this was the crazy concept that I faced. But I mean, it was always in another concept that when I studied at Tehran University, some of the students asked me that, where are you from? And I was like, from Afghanistan. I was like, Afghan people can come to Tehran University. I mean, it started from there. And then when I was invited to so many exhibitions in different parts of the world, I mean, I could see when I when I was starting to talk about Afghanistan, everybody they had an image, you know, and they were like, you are really Afghan? And I was like, what do you mean you are really, you know? And I shouldn't be Afghan? I mean, this kind of, this image is so dark. I mean, especially when I was working on my photo project since 2015, I was searching about women of Afghanistan. I could see all burqa on the cover of the image, magazines, like a woman who her husband cut her nose. I mean, all the dark images. But when I went back to Afghanistan for the first time in 2013, and then since 2015, I was between Tehran and Kabul, I discovered so many things in Afghanistan, about women life, that I told you that when you talk about a war zone, of course, women and art are two important subjects that always overlooked and underestimated. So I just wanted to go through the women life in a war zone, but not the cliche and stereotype of women of my country, but of course their beauty, their hope, their femininity and resilience that I could see. I mean, all the women who you see in my pictures, they all have their specific stories. Like it started from hats in the middle of mountains till the textiles, till the their stories in the middle of the streets of Kabul. It was not so easy for me. I mean, I have threatened a lot by a father, by a brother because of these photos. And as I told you before, that when people see that, they think that, okay, it seems so simple, but I mean, but unfortunately, my country and women in my country, we are still we got stuck in this cliche that, of course, the world doesn't care. But I mean, I'm just about to prove that, okay, women of Afghanistan are not burqa. Our identity is not burqa. And there are still beauties in the middle of a war zone. So that's why I went to tell, as you said, the untold stories of women of my country.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we were talking earlier, you said sometimes people were surprised, oh, they're actual Afghan women, it's not a model, it's not something else. And I wonder, since we're talking about storytelling and everybody loves a good story, if you might share a story or two. Who are these women? Were they excited? Were they nervous? Why did they decide to participate? Tell us one or two stories of who they are. I want to know who they are.
Of course, I mean, I told you that when people see that, they think that, okay, a beautiful woman just posed in front of my camera in the middle of the streets. But it's not like that. I mean, it was, I don't know, like, I just don't want to tell the stories of war, but if you know the story of Farkhunda, like the angry people and religious people killed her in 2018, I think, yeah, in the middle of Kabul streets. So I mean, it was like, it could be that much risky and crazy. So, but it was, I mean, the thing is that I was not a documentary photographer, and I was a stage photographer, and I went to streets to, I mean, to spend more time with women. And it was not just me, and of course, all those women without security guards or nothing. And I just asked these women, I mean, the journey that I went to find them, even like from a movie, from a story, from and some of the friends. I mean, I went through this story to find these women, because when you talk about Afghanistan, it's not easy to ask a woman to stand in front of your camera. So that's why I tried to take the pictures of some of the artists, musicians, and some of the women who could be more visible than others. But the stories are, I mean, when I talk about the beauty in the statements of my works, it means that, I mean, the story of a hat, the story of those textiles, the story of a scarf, that it came from the, like, east of Afghanistan, west of Afghanistan. I mean, this diversity. I just went through this to work on the pieces of cultural heritage of Afghanistan, and of course the beauty and the femininity. I mean, as I told you the story, even being a woman in Afghanistan is not easy. I mean, I remember that I bought a red lipstick from Tehran, and I went back to Afghanistan. And after 3 months, I went back to Tehran, and my sister was like, "Why you didn't use that?" And I was like, even I didn't find the time to use that red lipstick. I mean, you know, it's very simple, but I mean, we are talking about the state of men, Afghanistan. But I mean, we were trying to find this freedom and to find a time to experience this freedom, even in the middle of so many things that could stop us. But of course, the story of resilience, I mean, one of the story of these women who I photographed was that she was born as a refugee in Pakistan, and they came back after the fall of Taliban in 2006 to Afghanistan. And this woman was in south of Afghanistan in Helmand, and she wanted to be an actress, but her family never accepted that. But she came to Kabul and to live alone, and she was a superstar in the cinema of Afghanistan, actually, during Republic. So I mean, these stories was so, for me, was amazing, and the world never see. I mean, these stories. I mean, you know, like we all know the story of that woman that her husband cut her nose, and of course, in general, we know the story of Sharbat Gul, that dear Steve McCurry took it. So, but Afghan women are more than this. I mean, whatever. When I heard their stories, so for me. I just wanted to go through the colors, through the diversity, femininity, and resilience of women of Afghanistan, and to, of course, break this stereotype on this cliche and this dark image of women of Afghanistan in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Selene, you and I have discussed at length, the ordinary Afghan women, the people who are just be interested in living an interesting life. Maybe they aren't exceptional, maybe they're not a journalist or a lawyer or something like that, but they, of course, should have the right to a life where they can work and participate economically. And I want you to, I'm going to combine quite a few questions here, so don't be cross with me, but I want you to talk a little bit about the organization that you started, which is She Works for Peace. And I'm going to combine that with another question, which is this idea that work has become this act of resistance in Afghanistan, and layer in the ordinary lives of women. I think you know where I want you to go with this, but can you talk about what you're doing and,
okay,
and how that looks in practice?
All right, I'll give it a go. So I've been living on and off in Afghanistan for the past 13 years now. I used to run a school for storytellers. The project came to an end in 2020. I was involved with the evacuation of my former students and their families back in August. And then I went back to Kabul to basically build a safety net for those who were not lucky enough to be able to leave the country. And we started basically providing help to widows and orphans, disabled people, the elders. But there was one thing that was there despite everything. And this was actually women that didn't want to give up. And I know this sounds like super weird in a country that basically, fell apart in 10 days. Women didn't want to accept the situation. They want to rebuild their lives and livelihoods. So getting to know many of them that, of course, had lost their jobs and livelihoods, after Kabul fell in mid-August 2021, came the idea to basically create She Works for Peace as a way to, help them out with whatever it is that they could do to support their families. The idea behind that is basically to link economic recovery with peace building and, reframe the narrative around women. Generally, here, at least from what my family and friends tell me, we see Afghan women as passive victims, which is not what we get to see on a daily basis in Kabul. We see women that, despite everything, are showing, resilience, are showing a resistance. They're trying to rebuild their lives and livelihoods through micro businesses. We're in a country where nowadays over 80% of the population survives on less than 30 cents per day. Like poverty threshold 1.25. So we're very, very far from there. We're in a country where people have started selling children, have started selling kidneys to eat. And yes, in Afghanistan, basically, we don't get bombed every day, but the war is really far from over. The fighting may be over. The war is not. Poverty is war. The impossibility of getting an education is war. The impossibility of leading a public life, that is also war. So the idea there was to start working with women who had skills like in, handicrafts, for example, like, they're embroiderers or they're tailors. And they're the only breadwinners in their families. So we started supporting them and trying to help them, like by buying their products, by linking them up with companies in Europe and the US. And then little by little, things started changing from the handicraft sector. We move on to food production. We moved on to silk production. And the interesting thing, and this is the thing I always try to say, is that we're seeing a revolution. I know, or we're seeing resistance. I know that generally when we talk about revolution and resistance, we're thinking about people like, waging wars and with weapons. They do not carry weapons, but they're still staging a revolution through their work. And this is the revolution of the average Jane in Afghanistan, working from home in a place that doesn't allow you to get an education, that doesn't allow you to go outside and live a public life, that doesn't allow you to be who you are. Yet, these women are trying to basically reframe their own participation within their families and communities through work. I know you wanted to hear about one of them specifically. There are many stories of resistance. One of them is maybe particularly interesting. It's a young girl coming from central Afghanistan, very rural area. And she decided that she wanted to expand the work that her mother started off like a few years ago. And she basically, I just got to meet her a few months ago, and she was very direct. Like, she was like, "Miss, help me, I need help." And she basically asked for some help to expand her bee farm. She's a beekeeper. And now she's training other women to become beekeepers. And beekeeping is basically becoming their livelihoods. So in a place where you don't have many rights left, Afghanistan, according to Human Rights Watch, is the only country on earth that basically banned women education. Yet women are organizing themselves, not just to support their families, but to rebuild their families and communities from within. And I guess that this is really an act of rebellion.
And you think about, and you think about what that does to the power structure in the home itself, even if it's not external, but when someone is making money and someone is not, that has really profound ramifications in a very, very exciting way. Düzen, I'd like to go back to you. I want to talk about Back to Life. I've watched some films about it, and it's a really extraordinary organization where, well, you're going to speak about it, not me, but one of the questions I have is, firstly, I hope you'll talk a little bit about it and what that's doing for women in their community. But a lot of the women it's serving are in camps, and they have been in camps for years and years. And so I wonder if you also might talk about how the work of Back to Life can kind of go beyond, is it possible to take it beyond the confines of those camps to the broader community?
I think there are many fights which we have to go through. There is a fight of day. For example, Back to Life.
Explain a little bit just for our audience, just in case they don't know what Back to Life does.
And then Back to Life, the project from Women for Women from HÁWAR in the IDP camps. We have one in Camp Kardia near to the Syrian border, and one in Sharia, which is in Iraq, in the region of Kurdistan. And we decided to go to the IDP camps because the women were not allowed to get out. Even they are allowed, they are not able to, because you need possibilities for transportation. You need money, you need reasons. There are so many problems. And of course, we have sometimes a way of Oriental patriarchal thinking. I think we have this problem worldwide. This is not just in an Oriental way. This is very important, I think. Sometimes I think it's very difficult when we are doing West-splaining from Europe and say what is happening there and what not. So therefore, we have to talk with the people who are affected, of course. And the people are living about 8 years in this IDP camps, and we started to beginning with trauma psychological lessons and teachers, for example, because many of the women who are in our projects were in ISIS captivity about 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. And we have, unfortunately, a very high self-suicide quote. They survived ISIS, but they don't survive their life because they didn't come back to life. And this is a really challenge right now. And what we find out was that many wishes from the women were not just talk about what was happening to them and just to imagine what happened to the women in ISIS captivity in the 21st century is unspeakable. There's a lot of dehumanization which was going on there. They have been raped and sold in slave markets in Mosul, which is 3,300 kilometers away from here. So this is unimaginable what they went through. Then they survive this ISIS captivity, and I think we have to do all which we could do to help these women, because you don't heal the women, you heal a whole society when you heal these women. So the goal from ISIS was to rape the women and took their honor. And ISIS knew very well that to rape a Yazidi woman means that she is not a Yazidi anymore. And we have religious leaders, which is really revolutionary, that made a decision, a religious one, and said, even they have been raped by ISIS, they are still Yazidi women. So this was what I mean by different fights. For example, we spoke a lot with political decision makers, with our religious leaders, and we said that the women feel guilty for something which they are not guilty for, of course, and that we have to think about this rule. As you can imagine how important that is in one of the oldest religions to make decrees like that, but we had one in 2015. Unfortunately, the children which have been gave birth by rape are still in a way like in the middle world. They are not belong to anyone. They are between Yazidism and Islamization. They are living in the al-Hol camps where the enemies is living, and the mothers don't want to leave them, but of course they want to go back home. So we have a lot of challenges and problems there. So I think we in our projects, which is very interesting, we begin it with this kind of trauma psychological courses, illiterate courses, and sewing courses. But right now, they want IT courses, English lessons, so many different things. They have the same wishes in times of digitalizations like we have here in Germany or in Europe. And this is really interesting how the wishes became bigger and bigger. And my sister is doing a scoring girl project there. So in the middle of nowhere, really, in the mountains, she has the scoring girls, which is very impressing and huge and very powerful. And of course, the humans there, not just the women, are so thankful for everything what you give them, because they are just living in this IDP camp. And one woman said to me, it's not have been killed like ISIS, but it's a death day by day, bit by bit. And therefore, the fight must be to help them in the concrete situation, which means they say, we don't need medicine, we need chances, we need hope, we need money, we need jobs, and we need education for us and our children. And the second thing is that we are fighting in Europe and Germany for special quota projects for this vulnerable persons, and also legal ways for women and children. And of course, we have to think about our migration and asylum politics in Europe. So there are the bigger goals, and then the goals day by day. And the biggest fear of the people there, which is very true, is that the world have forgotten them. And therefore, you have to go there, and you don't have to bring them hope because they have their own power. But you have to do the same like 2014. You have to talk about the stories of that people there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
sorry for my bad English. I'm not a native speaker.
You're not allowed to say sorry here on the stage. And it's just bringing that humanity back to, and I think the sort of the common theme among all of these stories that we're hearing is kind of building back that life. And I was going to go back to you actually, Grace, and talk about people who've escaped slavery in some form, and ask you what it looks like in your mind. How do you rebuild a life? How do you carve out the space, culturally, economically, socially, to rebuild a life and become a person again? Because I think people feel so incredibly dehumanized that they have no worth, which is sickening.
Absolutely. I think survivors have to rebuild, often with zero support, sometimes even from their own families, if they've been displaced in this process or moved around the world through a supply chain. They're alone in a country. But I think the unbelievable resilience, especially, as I said, it's a highly gendered issue, of women in these settings to change systems, not just for themselves, but for the communities around them that they know will be vulnerable, is profound. And I think really what it looks like is for people to get out of the way and give those who have lived experience the positions at the front. So for us within the modern slavery movement, there's an incredible leader named Sophie Otiende. She is the CEO of the Global Fund to End Slavery. She's a poet, she's an expert, and she's a survivor. It's quite confronting that she's the only survivor leading one of the international organizations focused on the eradication of modern slavery. And I think that really communities have the answers to their own issues. They just often don't have the visibility, the financial support, or the means to get the global attention. And I think often the road to hell is paved with good intentions. People want to be a voice for the voiceless. No one is voiceless. They need to be given the opportunity to do that. And those of us with platforms and privilege and access need to hold that door open, not close it behind us and retell another person's story, or to say, let me speak on behalf of this issue, when, you know, for us, being the producers of the Global Slavery Index, which breaks down the prevalence of modern slavery in every country in the world, it looks at government response, it looks at effectivity of government response, and perhaps most poignantly in the setting we're in at the moment, it looks at the import risk of the G20 and the world's most powerful nations, which just from 5 different products is a $354 billion import risk. So we can start talking about responsibility. But I think that for us, Walk Free was very much founded from working with and learning from survivors, and it's central to the work we do, and it's foundational to every core part of our work. I've talked about the research, but we work on government policy, we work with the world's faith leaders, we work in communities through the Freedom Fund, we work with financial systems and CEOs. Everything that we do is consulted by the expertise of survivors, and I think we're in a unique position, being the producers of this leading academic work, to say that that is of equal or even less value than lived experience, because otherwise, sitting here in the Women's Forum, the people that have the most experience and most shiny resumes will be men, and they'll be white men, and they'll be old white men, and suddenly we're sitting here going, how did we get here? So I think it's reframing really a Western construct of what is an expert, and really the people with this lived experience from within their communities have the solutions. They just need to be given a chance to do that. So it's foundational to our work, and certainly the next global estimate of modern slavery will be published in July, and this Global Slavery Index as well, and you'll definitely see the leadership of survivors throughout that.
Okay, so I want to follow up on that, because I know you also do some work in conflict mediation. And one of the problems that we all know is that women are basically never at the table, yet you've told me that they're fantastic collaborators, they're more likely to meet in the middle, and they are consistently overlooked. So I wonder if you might talk about that. And then I'm going to ask all of you how we bring women to the table in the meeting them where they're at. And how do we shine the spotlight on the remarkable women that you've all talked about, interacted with, or photographed? But let's start with conflict mediation.
Look, briefly, I would just say it's a fact that women are foundational to successful peace processes. However, women are very underrepresented in mediating and negotiating tables. Often the first thing to be taken off the table is the rights of women in a conflict zone, as if it's some fluffy issue, not the foundation of sustainable development. But yeah, the facts speak for themselves. A woman that is where a peace process involves a woman, it's 20% more likely to succeed. And where women are excluded, and for example, with the information sharing, women are far more likely to quickly share information and to quickly share where a peace process is falling apart. I think women have to be, especially in communities, they have to be collaborators, and they have to be looking at the impact on their community. I think it's same for the issue, or the area of microfinance. If you invest in a woman, she'll invest in her community. So yeah, the work that I have done in these 43 active conflicts where I work with women, it is concerning to me that so many of these processes are run by men, and so many of the structures we see around foreign policy, diplomacy, war and conflict are from this weird Cold War hangover, as if we don't live in a really different world where women are the majority and young people are the majority, and yet it's very rare to see them in the rooms where decisions are being made, even though it disproportionately impacts us. And I think the last thing I'd say to your excellent point is that women are disproportionately impacted by war, but that is strategic. It's because if you break a woman, you break a community. It's been done in conflict time and time again. So we're not sad victims. They know it's the quickest way to break a community's back.
Yeah. So we're all on this stage, but I'm going to put the question to you, Düzen and Selene and Fatimah. How do we bring those voices of these amazing women that you interact with to the forefront? If they're not on this stage, how do we bring them to this stage?
My personal experience is that no one is waiting for you, especially not when you are talking about power. And also being a woman or agent of change in conflict zones means less power for men, of course. And for example, my experience when I found out the NGO Out of the Ashes of Genocide was that I came to Iraq and just saw men who were talking about our Yazidi women. And the women don't trusted them, for example, because they had this kind of feeling they don't understand what I feel and went through. And that was my superpower, to came back and to say that we have to do it. And my experience is that no one is waiting for you, especially in powerful moments. You have to take the permission by yourself. So no, I think the opposite is happening again and again. Every time when something becomes very powerful, you get a lot of resistance. And I would say, as a woman, you have to stand up and go and don't give up. And this is something which I went through because of my personal family story. So I had a grandmother who had a man life she didn't behave like a woman at that time. She had a gun, for example. She was living at the Syrian-Turkish border. She didn't give birth to many children, and no one was asking her. She took her right by herself. And I think this is something which is very important, which I always tell other young women who want to become more powerful, because they know about their power, but sometimes they have a lot of fear. But I think fear is no option. The way is where the fear is, in my opinion. And this would be my opinion.
We love your grandmother a lot.
Thank you.
I wish she were here right now. And I want to just remark on one quick thing, which is it's so frustrating that as men, and it is often men who are in power, and therefore men look at other people getting power and think that there's a smaller amount of pie left for them, the metaphorical pie, as if someone else getting power means they don't have power. But actually empowering women is empowering those communities, empowering their families, economically empowering their families. And so can we please I'm looking at you because I'm so frustrated at the situation, but can we please get over this idea that giving power to one group means taking power away from someone else? It just means making everyone bigger.
And I think it's not the guilty of the man. You're so right. It's a structure, and many men who are fighting for women rights are on our side. So we don't have to make the difference between men and women. It's about how the point of view, for example. And also the second thing is, I think we need quotas. Special quotas. For example, I was in an expert commission of the German parliament for cause of flights, and I talked about quotas for women who are sitting at the table in conflict zones. This is the second thing, I think.
And not just quotas, but women not just at the table, but being heard and having the opportunity to actually speak. Okay, sorry. Selene, you're going to talk about how do we get these amazing women, these beekeepers and the fabulous women you work with, how do we get them into the spotlight? How do we bring them to this stage?
And I guess I'll try my best. And I guess this is really the point. We need to go where the women are and tell the stories of those women that may not be famous, that may not already have a seat at the table. The Afghan negotiators, like in Doha, only had 3 women on their team, and they were all very well-known politicians. What about everybody else? So it's the vulnerable ones that we need to reach out to, that we need to empower, and that we need to evolve, because ultimately it's them rebuilding the country. So let's go where the women are, and let's start telling their stories too.
Okay, Fatimah, last word to you. How do we put women at the center of the picture?
To be honest, I just have a very different response to this. Yes, of course, I'm in Europe, I'm in West, and I'm very happy that I see these incredible women here. That's it's like so high for me, really, that you're talking to the same salary, like to same. I don't know, like even you talked about the women in the conflict zone. But to be honest, as I got stuck in Afghanistan, and I'm physically here but mentally there, but I mean, it's very different for me to talk about it, because I mean, all my beliefs just broke after I left Afghanistan. And when I think already now that after, I mean, 20 years of international community investment in Afghanistan, and after all the international community did in these 20 years for empowering women in Afghanistan, it was really just a joke. And now women cannot go back to school. I mean, like we are just nothing to this Taliban crazy war that they just target women. I mean, I don't know. Even I'm not ready to talk about it, because I attended to so many conferences. Once I left Afghanistan, I was in European Parliament. I was in so many conferences all around Europe. And as you said, the 3 women that they were in the negotiation team with Taliban, I met all of them in European Parliament. But we all were talking a lot, but nothing, you know. And if I now talk about, I mean, I'm not talking about all women, but of course women of my country. But okay, thank you so much for celebrating me. I mean, but I mean, whatever I talked and all my words, they didn't really help women of Afghanistan till now, and I'm not all women of Afghanistan. But of course, there are so many other ways that tell the untold stories of them. And of course, I mean, financially, like whatever we can help them to make them some works for them inside the country. But I hope really the world never forget women of Afghanistan.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the stories. I hope you enjoyed these incredible power women doing extraordinary work. Thank you so much for being here. It was an honor to moderate your panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you for all. So thank you for all of you. We are going to take a picture of you. In the meantime, just stay with us some more minutes. We are going to hear the youth voices. Finally, unfortunately, I won't be able to attend because my plane is leaving. And there is a cocktail after that. But in the meantime, let me thank you, everybody, the ambassador, Anne-Marie Descotes, and her team for hosting the event, all the speakers and moderators of the event, the Women's Forum partners, the audience online and here, not only the virtual audience, the Women's Forum's team, who was very active and had a lot to do to organize this event. You can have a look, and I invite you to have a look to the recommendations of the Women's Forum. So it's online. You can have it on with your QR code on your here on your, how do you say it in badge? Okay, it's the same word in French. So youth voices are going to be heard now, and it's Avery Johnston from KPMG who is going to host this last event. Thank you very much for being with us, and please stay a little bit longer, and then I invite you to go to the cocktail. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginie, and have a safe flight. As Virginie said, my name is Avery Johnstone, and I sit within the Climate Risk and Strategy team at KPMG in the UK. And I've had the great privilege of being a participant in the Women's Forum Youth Voices initiative. We are delighted to be at the French Embassy with so many influential policymakers, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and young people to introduce the Women's Forum Youth Voices initiative. At the global meeting last November in 2021, the Women's Forum launched the Youth Voices Network and invited 100 young people to participate in the meeting for the first time ever. Building on that success, the Women's Forum wanted to foster intergenerational dialogue and inclusive dialogue with more young people in the context of their work with the G7 call to action. Yesterday, 30 young people convened from around the world at Microsoft in Berlin to collaborate and ideate in policy recommendations to G7 leaders. We were split into 5 groups, aligned to the Women's Forum's 5 key areas of priority: climate action, feminist foreign policy, the future of work, breaking gender bias, and access to health. These groups, led by moderators from Microsoft, HEC Paris, ESCP, Walk Free, and Bayer, have developed recommendations to share with you all today. So it's my distinct pleasure to welcome the 5 representatives from these 5 groups to present their perspectives on the G7 call to action. So I'm going to call them up one by one, and they're going to share their policy recommendations with you. And then we've got one final thing to say all together. So first, Anne, if you'd like to join me at the podium.
Hi, I'm Anne, and I represent the Youth Ambassador Climate Group. Conference rooms at COP26, where critical climate-related decisions were made, showed a clear picture. They were primarily occupied by men. But should such decisions to cap global warming at 1.5 degrees be made by mostly one gender? Reports from Bloomberg revealed that companies with at least a third of their female directors had lower emission growth rates, 0.6 compared to 3.5%, than companies with a less diverse board. Further, more diverse companies also score better in environmental disclosure. So shouldn't we encourage more diversity in boards in the face of a climate crisis? The Climate and Gender Youth Voices team thinks we should. Collaboratively, we came up with action points and recommendations to help companies align towards a gender-inclusive route in favor of the climate. Transparency and setting meaningful targets in environmental disclosure are vital for climate action, but the same applies for disclosing gender-related metrics. While such metrics are already being implemented and enforced across many G7 countries, we recommend tying them to tangible goals. Within 2 terms of board renewals, or at the latest in 2030, we recommend that at least 40% of company board members identify as women across G7 countries. But further, proper sustainability management goes beyond a company's border and thereby entails the responsibility to fully control and manage the whole supply chain. So the same reasoning is behind our call to economic actors to extend their gender-inclusive route beyond their boundaries. We recommend that by 2025, companies contract new suppliers that have at least 40% of board members who identify as women. By 2040, all suppliers should meet this 40% target. Understanding how climate issues and gender are intertwined, we firmly believe that these actions would not only strengthen, but also accelerate our actions towards climate change mitigation and adaptation in order to meet the ambitious goal of net zero by 2050. Gender justice is climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Michael, if you'd like to join me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael, and I represent the Youth Ambassador Health Group. From how clinical trials are orchestrated to how heart attacks are diagnosed, the healthcare system has been designed in the image of men. Women represent over 70% of the healthcare workforce, yet occupy only 25% of leadership roles. We believe that reframing healthcare systems means empowering more women so that women's perspective on health can be accurately represented. A 2018 UK public health study found that 1 in 3 women suffer from gynecological health issues. Yet only 12% of global health spending is allocated to sexual and reproductive health. Another study by the OECD found that only 60% of women between the ages of 50 and 69 years of age have access to mammograms in G7 countries. We call for top-down measures to alleviate barriers for women ascending to leadership roles in healthcare. We call for scholarships to relieve the economic burden so disproportionately felt by women pursuing careers in health. We call for zero pay gap policies in healthcare institutions. And we call for policies that defend and protect fertility autonomy. Access to contraception and to abortion is indisputable in the path towards equal opportunity. From the bottom up, we call for more educational opportunities and initiatives that inspire women to pursue and study STEM. We call for increased mentorship programs to guide women professionals in the healthcare system. Representation generated by investing in women, by equal pay, by fertility autonomy, and by education and mentorship. With these initiatives, we can change the healthcare system. A system that acknowledges and reflects women's perspectives. A system that deploys research capital equitably. A system with leaders as diverse as its patients. Thank you.
Shiva, if you'd like to join me.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shreya George. I am a youth delegate of the Feminist Diplomacy and Foreign Policy Group of the Women's Forum. If I may, I'd like to call your attention to the fact that it's 2022, and not a single country in the world has achieved gender equality completely. This striking reality is even reflected in the representation of the G7. As you may have noticed, not a single G7 country is this year represented by a female head of state. This, ladies and gentlemen, is indicative of where we really are with gender equality today. Despite decades of contributions and progress in this sector, the reality is that, for the most part, women's rights, their needs, and women themselves continue to be underrepresented. This is the basis of our call to action to G7 leaders. We urge G7 leaders to adopt and implement feminist foreign and trade policies for the protection and promotion of women's rights and representations, not only in G7 countries, but also throughout the world. We're asking for support through financial mechanisms, support through structural changes that protect women's rights, and support through key sectors that empower women. Our recommendations, therefore, are, firstly, that all G7 leaders and their states adopt feminist foreign policies, and as part of this, ensure that at least 85% of their official development assistance is provided to addressing gender as a significant or principal goal by 2025. And of this, at least 20% from the current less than 5% is dedicated to achieving gender as a main objective within their official development assistance policies and programs. We also ask that all 100% of the official development assistance is screened through the OECD's gender equality policy marker so that we can track commitment towards gender equality in an accountable and transparent fashion. Secondly, we ask G7 leaders to facilitate systematic change in their supply chains and trade processes. We call upon them to recognize the alarming fact that 1 in every 130 women today are subject to modern slavery. And with more than 190 million women working in supply chains throughout the world, this is inevitable that a significant portion of them will be vulnerable to structural abuse, including forced labor and modern slavery. We therefore ask that G7 leaders systematically and critically assess their own supply chains and trade agreements and adopt and implement a gender-sensitive and human rights just supply chain and trade processes. And not just in G7 countries, but also that they advocate for such trade agreements to be implemented worldwide. Lastly, we urge G7 leaders to support sectors that are critical to women's empowerment, such as education and health, and to increase the financing and policy support provided to these sectors. In terms of education specifically, we ask that at least 15% of the official development assistance budget is dedicated to education with a particular focus on women and girls' education. Under health, we ask that financing for the health sector, and particularly reproductive health and family planning, is increased from the current very insignificantly low rate of 0.1% of the official development assistance budget of G7 countries. We ask that financing for both these sectors and other sectors critical to women's empowerment are increased. Lastly, we urge G7 leaders to understand the urgency of the situation and to make a public commitment to achieve these objectives at least by 2025, so that we can continue to make the much needed progress in this sector in an accountable, in a transparent, and in a consistent manner. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I'd like to say there's a lot left to be done. And therefore, we're very grateful for all of your attention today to the Women's Forum for facilitating this process. And my sincere thanks in advance to the G7 leaders for taking our actions, our recommendations into sincere consideration. Thank you.
Maria-Lix.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marie-Alix, and I'm representing the gender bias group for the Youth Ambassadors. 0 hour. 0 hour is the average paternity leave within 4 out of 7 G7 countries, while maternity leave accounts for 10.8 weeks. This example illustrates the issue we aim G7 leaders to tackle. Still today, women are seen as caregivers and associated with domestic work and the upbringing of children. Maternal leave is implementing over paternal leave as the preferred option in both the private and the public sectors. Domestic work and raising children are still seen as unpaid work, and thus they form the core of long-lasting economic inequalities for women. There are many implications arising from this gender bias. For instance, the imbalance of parental leave policies leads to further unequal access to job opportunities, increase in gender pay gap, and ultimately, a lack of female role model for women. Our recommendations for G7 leaders today are the following. First, to assess the status quo, we ask to collect, monitor the data about parental, maternal, and paternal leaves within both the public and the private sectors, included but not limited to the proportion of employees taking the leaves, the duration of the leave, the return to work rate, all disaggregated by genders. Second, we call to create a sustainable framework of parental leave for both the private and the public sectors. And lastly, we call to create an entitled income-related parental leave to provide financial insurance for parents and incentivizing them to take the leave offer. Ultimately, I want a world where the sacrifice between having a family and ascending in one's career never has to be made. And I want this opportunity for every person in this room. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Eleonora.
Good evening. I'm Eleonora, and I'm from the Jobs of the Future group. How many of you here ever heard about Hedy Lamarr? How many of you in the audience, you can raise your hands? Yeah, I'm not that surprised that there are very few raised hands, 3 or 4. Hedy Lamarr is the woman behind the advances in communication technology that happened in the 1940s and that led to technologies that we now know pretty well. The Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the GPS. I learned about the scientific contributions of Mrs. Lamarr only a few days ago, and I thought, why I didn't know this before? And I'm pretty sure that many of you now are wondering the same. Women always strive to receive recognition and equal opportunities in scientific and technological fields. They still do. STEM careers are the jobs of the future. According to data, 70% of future jobs will indeed require STEM-related skills. But today, only 28% of STEM students globally are women. This gender disparity is alarming, and we, as the youth representatives, recommend the G7 leaders to tackle the issue through the following 3 points. First, education. Leveraging on the already mentioned Women's Forum call to actions, we call the G7 leaders to restructure and expand current primary curricula with STEM qualifications, and to upskill and reskill women in workforce through government funding support programs. Second, financial support. We call the G7 leaders to allocate national public investment funds towards women-owned businesses and STEM businesses which already enforce diversity in the workforce. 3, visibility. We urge the G7 leaders to implement national campaigns promoting a platform for visibility and networking for women in STEM. As representatives of the youth, we demand all G7 leaders and countries to take action. If not addressed now, women underrepresentation and the lack of diversity in the future labor force will not only hinder businesses, but it will hinder societies as a whole. Thank you.
A massive thank you to each one of you. Can we get another round of applause for all of the young people in this audience? Very well done. So we're not quite done yet, but before we do, there are many, many thank yous that Virginie alluded to and said that I also feel like need to be said. But thank you very much to the Women's Forum for their investment in time and resources to be able to facilitate this kind of youth initiative. Being able to foster this intergenerational dialogue is incredibly important to accelerating solutions. So thank you to the Women's Forum. Thank you to Microsoft for their support for this initiative. Thank you to the French Embassy for hosting us, and to the Women's Forum's broader community of partners, collaborators, speakers, moderators, and the audience. Your attention and your support has been incredibly valuable to us as young leaders. And we have had a fantastic day. It's not quite over, but we will have a cocktail in it's called the Rue de France, I just learned. But the lobby where we've been having lunch, there'll be lovely cocktails for us to enjoy and continue our networking. But before we end, I really do want to end with these young women. And so we're going to do one very quick round of one word each, where you will each summarize kind of what the last 2 days has meant to you, or what your summary of the last 2 days has been. So if you want to grab the mic, we can go around one by one. We'll have to share mics.
Does this
work?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Eleonora.
From my side, I'd say shared leadership.
Amazing. Marie-Alix?
I would say empowerment.
I would say persistence to keep going at all the things we need to do in this sector.
I would say collaboration. And I would end with rethinking.
Amazing. Once again, thank you all very much, and thank you. All right, we're going to grab a photo of us. You're free to go.